Beautiful. Okay, so this evening we are talking about iron and veganism, right? So we want to talk about how to prevent and reverse deficiencies. For those who are viewing, you may or may not be experiencing this specific issue at this time, but it's still great to have a good understanding of how this stuff works when it comes to iron specifically, because it's something that impacts a lot of people. And it's something that, if it's an issue that you end up having to deal with, it really sucks, to put it lightly. So we want to try to prevent that if possible. And then also we want to share information so that you'll be aware of how to resolve those issues while still being vegan, if that is what you are trying to do. All right, so we are going to dive right on in here. All right, so first, just taking it from the very beginning here, what is iron, right? So iron is one of the essential trace minerals. Okay, so when we talk about plant-based nutrition, or even just nutrition overall, we know that we have what we call essential vitamins, essential minerals, and what have you. And what that means is that you have to get those things, you have to get those nutrients from the foods that you're eating or from some outside source, because it's not just produced by the body itself. So iron is one of the essential nutrients, and it's a trace mineral, meaning that we have a set of minerals that are considered major minerals, such as calcium, etc. Kind of familiar with those. And then we have iron, which is actually a trace mineral, meaning that we technically need it in smaller amounts, but it's still essential. And so we still have to make sure that we're getting it. We'll talk about, as we continue to go over the information, we'll learn exactly why there's so much of a focus on iron, even though it is a trace mineral and we don't need it in as much of a quantity. We'll learn about why that's the case in the next slides. All right, so we also know that iron is stored in the red blood cells. It carries oxygen throughout the body. Okay, it's super important. If you're not breathing and you're not hydrated and oxygenated, then you are not alive. So, of course, it's something that is a key function. It's also responsible for energy and metabolism, right? So, there's two types of iron. Okay, so you probably heard of this, but there's heme and non-heme. And personally, I took medical tech terminology in high school, so I always know how to identify some of these root words here. But if you can just remember that heme is always going to mean or represent blood, then that's how you'll be able to remember how to distinguish the difference between the two. So heme is simply meaning it's from blood foods. I call it blood foods because that's what it is with animals. And then we have the non-heme source of iron, which is from plant foods. All right, so what are some of the differences in a little more detail between the two, right? So many people will tell you that heme iron is better, or that it's more important to make sure that you're getting heme iron. Now, of course, the word better is subjective. So if someone says that heme iron is better, you need to kind of ask, okay, well, what do you mean by better, right? Because oftentimes what they're really saying is that it's easier. How is it easier? Because that's another subjective term there. Okay, so it's easier because of the fact that the source of iron in heme sources is more readily accessible because it's already been processed by the animal, right? So what do I mean by that? Basically, if you can kind of think of it as like it's already been broken down by the animal, okay? But ultimately, that animal got its iron source from a plant, okay? So iron is going to come originally from a plant as a primary source, and then the animal eats the plants and then Some of us, we eat the animals, right? And that's the heme source of iron. Okay. So with that said, of course, we can understand that it's totally possible to obtain all of the iron that you need from plants. All right, so why should we even care or focus on iron? Well, as we know, there's a lot of people who struggle with iron deficiency anemia, right? It's one of the most common nutrient deficiencies amongst both vegans and non-vegans. All right, so it's actually also more prevalent in African Americans, and that's due to pre-existing conditions or concurrent existing conditions, right? And also it's also more prevalent in women. And a large part of that is because of the monthly blood loss through a woman's monthly cycle. Okay, so if you are African American and you are a woman, then this is definitely something that you want to be able to keep this knowledge and this information on your radar. All right, so what are some of the signs? Some of the signs of iron deficiency include fatigue, weakness, okay, brittle and dry nails, hair, and skin. Dry nails, hair, and skin is not normal, okay? I know that some demographics, right? Some of us have different types of hair, but one thing that is definitely important to be aware of is that if you have extraordinary dryness, your nails are brittle, your skin is dull, and so on and so forth, may need to check your iron levels. Okay. Something else is that is fairly common actually are cravings for ice or non-food items such as soap, laundry detergent. Believe it or not, there's sometimes an attraction to or a desire for those non-food items, and that is a nutrient deficiency. Okay, also shortness of breath, cold extremities, and all of this is of course beyond, don't become no hypochondriac out here, but this is when it becomes exaggerated, right? This is how you know these are some of the signs you may need to go ahead and check your nutrient levels. Also restless leg and muscles. And then you actually might end up being completely asymptomatic with no symptoms at all. Okay, but these are some of the things to be aware of. All right, so pop quiz here. I want to see some responses here in the chat. If you can go ahead and type your answer here to the question, true or false? Veganism is a major cause of iron deficiency. What do y'all think? Yes or no? Type it in the chat, or maybe it should be true or false. True or false? Let me see, do y'all know y'all stuff? Okay, I see some y'all chiming in with, okay, we got some wisdom in the audience. All right, so let's see. Looks like most people are saying false. Okay, y'all know what time it is. All right, let's see. Let's go ahead and reveal this answer. So that's actually false. All right, so veganism does not cause iron deficiency. However, and this however part may seem kind of confusing or contradictory, but it's not, and I'm gonna explain it. So, however, vegans are more likely to suffer from anemia and iron deficiency. Okay. So, what I mean by that is that it's not a major cause. Like if you go vegan, it's not going to mean that inherently you're going to end up having iron deficiency, or that veganism is the main reason why iron deficiency exists. Okay. But this is to say that if you go vegan, or if you are vegan, if you're not eating animal foods and getting those heme sources of iron, you do have to have the knowledge. And so many people lack the knowledge of how to make sure that you are not deficient in iron. All right, so we're going to talk about why that is the case. All right, so first, I want to highlight or give an overview of some key practices, right, that we can implement for prevention and treatment of iron deficiency. Okay, so this is so important because as I show you here, or as I mentioned here in step one, most people only focus on step one, which is to eat a sufficient amount of high iron foods. Anybody who is in trouble with their iron levels will typically automatically try to figure out which foods can they eat as a vegan in order to increase their iron levels. And that's great. And you got to also do the things listed in step 2 and 3. All right. So step 2 is basically to make sure that when you are increasing your amount of iron through your foods, you also have to make sure you're properly combining and preparing those foods to boost the absorption of the iron. All right. And then step 3 is going to be to make sure that you control the things that are pulling away from your iron levels. All right. So it makes sense when you think about it, but most of the time, I would say probably those who are in trouble with their iron levels, it kind of sends you into maybe a place of panic where you're trying to just grab and figure out how can I eat more iron? Okay. But we also have to figure out how to boost the iron we're getting. How can I make sure I can actually use this stuff? Right. And then also, how can I make sure I'm not taking away from it? Super important. All right. So we'll cover each of these in a little more detail here. All right. So plant-based sources of iron are plentiful. They are abundant. You do not have to be nervous out here about the fact that you're not eating steak and whatever else, whatever other meats, you know what I'm saying? And you thinking that you're not going to be able to get your iron. False, okay? So you can eat legumes are a really high source of iron, as well as quinoa. So those are my two favorite sources. I eat those two every day, just about. Quinoa and chickpeas are one of my favorite sources, as well as lentils. Lentils are super high in iron. All right. Also, we have the list here. We'll just go through it. You can also obtain a lot of iron from cashews, chia seeds, all the seeds, y'all. So linseed, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds. We also can get it from kale. We can get iron from dried fruits, such as apricots and figs, super high in iron, as well as raisins. And some of the cereals these days, breakfast cereals, are also fortified with iron. All right, and then we can also get a lot of nutrients from herbs. This is something that people sleep on in 2021 is our herbal medicine, our herbal supplements. All right, so specifically herbs such as sarsaparilla, burdock root, and sea moss are going to be high sources of iron. So that's step 1, knowing where to get it from. All right, so now that we got it, we want to know how to make sure we can absorb it and utilize it. All right, so when you are eating those foods that are high in iron, you want to make sure you pair it. A good just kind of rule of thumb to remember, because I know it looks like a lot of words on this screen right here, but a good rule of thumb is just always remember high iron needs vitamin C. All right, so vitamin C, this can be as simple as, I know I had the question, what are some things that we can do during detox week, during the detox challenge, to make sure that we're boosting our iron levels or just making sure we're maintaining those levels. All right, and so a very simple thing that you can do, if I'm having kale, then I'm going to squeeze some lemon juice on it. If I'm having kale, I may squeeze lime juice on it, right? Make sure that you always are trying to pair those two. A high source of the iron needs the vitamin C. So that's a simple way. And you'll notice also that there's recipes within my guide, detox guide, that will just already include that. Okay, so anytime you're having a salad, a super easy thing to do, we want to also make sure we kind of move away from processed foods, right? So making your own salad dressing. That's why this is such a great idea to do, or practice to do, is to make your own dressing, because you can just, your dressing can consist of lemon juice, lime juice, what have you, squeeze some of that on there. And then also whatever other seasonings and things you want to add to it. Boom, there goes your salad dressing, right? And what you're doing with that is you ain't even know it. You was making sure you was straight with your iron out here, okay? So that's one way to boost the iron. Also, blackstrap molasses. I know many of us are not really out here using that. So that's typically for those who have a current deficiency and are trying to correct it. That would be a great source of an iron booster. Also, beta carotene, which is found within yellow and red pigmented foods. So that's going to include apricots, beets, beet greens, carrots, and also collard greens, corn, red grapes, oranges, peaches, prunes, red peppers, spinach, sweet potatoes, tomatoes. Y'all know red and yellow foods, basically. Turnip greens and yellow squash. Sounds delicious. I'm hungry now. All right, so we also want to pair, we mentioned vitamin C. So some other sources of vitamin C will be, of course, the citrus fruits such as oranges, also grapefruits, and then the green leafy vegetables are awesome for iron boosting as well. So we have a list of those here. We have Swiss chard, we got broccoli, Brussels sprouts, bell peppers. Y'all know cauliflower. A lot of this looks very familiar because it's all within your detox meal plan. So if you're eating those foods, then you should be good to go, unless you leave out step 3, which we're about to get to, okay? Also worth mentioning is that hydrochloric acid, which is found in the stomach, will allow for the proper digestion of nutrients from foods. Okay, so that's going to be important to kind of keep that in mind as we move through to our next slide here. Okay, so this third step is super important once again. So we want to limit the inhibitors. We want to limit the things that are taking away from the iron. So don't consume these specific things within 2 hours before or after you have had iron-rich foods. Now, I know what y'all about to think, probably looking at this list. You're like, wait, I see some things that were on the other slide. Okay, hold that feeling and that thought. I'm going to explain. Let me explain. All right, so for the first thing I want to say, number 1, is I want to emphasize the first sentence here, which says within 2 hours before or 2 hours after. Okay, so that's important because that's the window of time that it's typically going to take for your body to digest what you are eating. All right, so as long as it's within that 2 hour, like, this is why it's also a great practice to try to include mono meals as part of your lifestyle. What do I mean by that? So that's where you are just having one thing and not pairing it with anything else. One thing at a time, like have one thing, let that fully digest. And I know that that's something that is going to take practice. I know firsthand because it's something that is maybe a little more advanced, okay? So when you're first transitioning and making your way through to plant-based lifestyle, some of this is going to be things that you can kind of just fold into it eventually. All right, but mono meals are actually awesome because it just allows you to make sure you're not canceling out whatever it is that you're getting from that specific food with something that it doesn't pair well with. All right, so also let's go down this list here. Of course, medications that reduce stomach acid, because again, going back to the previous slide, we want to maintain the amount of hydrochloric acid in our stomach so that we can have proper digestion. All right, if your stomach acid is very diluted, then you're going to have weaker digestion, and that means that the absorption is going to be thrown off. All right, so some medications actually do reduce stomach acid, such as antacids. Makes sense. It's an antacid. All right. Also, calcium found in tofu, broccoli, almonds, figs, turnip greens, and rhubarb. All right, this is important because sometimes when you're making your way down this vegan path and you're transitioning, there's a lot of guidance sometimes towards eating soy, tofu, and also some of these other items that are listed on here. And it's fine whatever side of the fence you want to be on with eating tofu or not. However, it's important to realize that it does tofu as well as soy just overall tends to pull from your iron levels. Okay, so we don't want to add tofu to our kale and think we're doing something out here. Like, no, you're canceling out your iron. All right. Also, eggs. Eggs can take away from your iron levels. You want to make sure you don't eat that within a 2-hour window of having something that is high in iron. Otherwise, you ain't getting no iron. All right. Oxalates in foods such as spinach, kale, beets, and nuts. We'll just leave that sentence as is. Or also, the list continues there with chocolate, tea, wheat bran, rhubarb, strawberries, and specific herbs such as oregano, basil, and parsley. Okay, so if you're having iron issues, then yes, you're going to need to key in on those things and make sure you don't eat those things at the same time you're eating your high iron foods. Polyphenols found in cocoa, coffee, some herbs, apples, peppermint, herbal teas such as black teas, walnuts, fruits such as apples, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries. Those are things that are super healthy, super good for you. However, you don't want to put it with your iron-rich food. And then finally, this is a major one right here. Okay, so if you don't remember nothing else that I've been talking about, I want you to keep in mind 2 major things. Let's say 3 major things. The first major thing is that 2-hour window. You can do whatever you want to do as long as you don't do it within 2 hours of the iron-rich food. All right, take that with a grain of salt, not whatever, but y'all know what I'm saying. And then the second thing to keep in mind is going to be if you are having issues with iron, make sure you don't eat those things that's listed there within the 2 hours. And then this third thing is super, super important. Y'all see me all the time teaching about soaking your nuts. Yes, soak your nuts. Yes, yes. Soak your nuts and soak lentils, soak your beans, soak your seeds. Why? It's because those items have phytic acid. Phytic acid is going to pull from your nutrient levels, specifically iron. All right. So when those things are soaked, they begin to release that phytic acid, and you are rinsing it off and pouring it down the drain when you get rid of all of that water that it was soaking in. Okay. So you have to soak them though for at least 4 hours. Ideally, you want to do it for 8 hours. All right. So those are some of the main ways to complete step number 3. All right. So why do so many, going back to that true false question, why do so many vegans struggle with the iron deficiency? All right. Especially when it's a fact that vegans consume more iron. We eating more iron out here because all we are dang eating is those plant foods that are high in iron, right? So we're technically taking in more iron than an omnivore or even I guess we say carnivore. However, vegans are also consuming more of those anti-nutrients that we just reviewed on the previous slide. Okay, so that's a major, major key. That is why I was mentioning that it's important to have this knowledge, because you may think you're out here doing something, but you're eating things that are canceling out what you have been taking in. Okay, so specifically to go into a little more detail about phytic acid, okay, main key takeaway here is it's not always about taking in more iron. Sometimes a major key, like you may have been having a really good amount of iron in your diet that you're eating, right? But the main thing that you want to focus on is reducing phytic acid. And that's going to already just automatically increase your iron levels. All right. So phytic acid greatly reduces the amount of iron that is available to your body. If you consume 5 to 10 milligrams of phytic acid, it can take away your iron absorption by 50%. All right. So that's why vegetarian eaters or vegan eaters should eat more iron than omnivores, just because we want to automatically or just naturally balance out the fact that technically you're probably having more phytic acid than an omnivore or a carnivore. Okay. So these are some of the recommended numbers for vegans and vegetarians, which would be to shoot for about 33 milligrams of iron versus the 18 milligrams that's recommended for omnivores, just because it's dang near almost impossible to fully balance out or remove that phytic acid that's found in so many of the beautiful plant foods that we love and enjoy and are good for us, unless you're doing the mono meals that I mentioned. All right. So how can we do that? We kind of touched on the first one already, which is to sprout, soak, ferment, and cook plant foods. All right. So when we talk about lentils and legumes specifically, you want to make sure that you, of course, are soaking them, and you also want to pressure cook them, meaning you want to bring them to a boiling and then simmer them and have a lid on them very tightly so that the pressure cooking helps to continue to release that phytic acid found in the plants. Okay. And I also have like a good kind of like way of thinking about this. It's basically like the phytic acid is kind of like the plant's defense mechanism per se, I guess. Like, you want to make sure that when you are consuming these plants, you're not taking in what it naturally releases whenever it is paired with certain things. Okay. So another way to also reduce the phytic acid is going to be to, again, pair it with vitamin C rich foods. All right. Um, Now, another thing too, when we are talking about making your own dressing, salad dressing, for example, if you were to include apple cider vinegar, that is also a great way that you can enhance the mineral absorption and also offset some of that phytic acid. So a great basic recipe for a salad dressing may be apple cider vinegar and your citrus, which is going to be a lemon or a lime, and then whatever type of seasonings or things that you enjoy. Super simple. Okay. So that is going to conclude our discussion on plant-based iron. Hopefully it did not jumble you up too much. And you can always refer back to the slides until you get it to where it's just second nature and you form your own rhythm of approaching these specific health habits. All right. So we will stop there.